Hi everyone, welcome back for the very last time to Ms. Bertazzoni's Reading Corner. Today, in honor of the fact that it's the last week of school, we're going to read the last 3 stories from Sideways Stories from the Wayside School. The first one of these stories is Nancy. And here we have Nancy and Mac. It'll just be interesting to figure out which one is which. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Mrs. Jules's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think of it as a girl's name or as a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of the quiet kid with the big hands and feet who sat over there in the corner next to John. Nancy was very quiet and shy. He was ashamed of his name. He had only one friend, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for a good reason. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. They just called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain "you." Nancy was afraid to ask his friend what her name was, because then he might have to tell her what his name was. He never could figure out why she never asked, but he was happy just to leave well enough alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend's teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up! You're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg. Get the lead out," said the teacher. "Your name is Mac?" said Nancy. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "My name is Nancy," Nancy called after her. Mac stepped back outside. "I was ashamed to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl's name." "Oh, I think it's cute," said Mac. "I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother has a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy. "That's why she gave me the name." "My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. "Hey, do you want to trade?" Nancy asked. "Can we?" asked Mac. "I don't see why not," said Nancy. "Okay," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times in opposite directions until they were so dizzy that they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy and Nancy was Mac. They said goodbye. Then Mac raced up to Mrs. Jules's room. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name is Mac," he announced. "I traded names." He held out his big hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "Glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Howdy, Mac," said Terrence. "Nice to see you, Mac," said BB. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, anybody want to trade?" Jason called. "I'll trade with you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. "Wait, I'll trade with you, Terrence," said Marisha. Marisha didn't like her name. "No, he's trading with me," said Jason. "I'll trade with you, Marisha," said Damien. "No, thanks," said Marisha. "I'll trade with you, Damien," said Mrs. Jules. "No, I want to be Mrs. Jules," said Stephen. It turned out that none of the children in Mrs. Jules's class liked their names. The children all spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy that they fell over. And when they stood up again, nobody knew who anybody was. "What are we going to do, Mrs. Jules?" asked Leslie, who was really Eric Bacon. "My name is not Mrs. Jules, it's Marisha," answered Terrence, who was really Jason. "It is not. I'm Marisha," said Dee Dee, who was really Joe. You're both wrong, said Marisha. I'm Mrs. Jules. This went on for an hour. At last, they figured out who the real Rondi was. She was missing her 2 front teeth. And after they figured out Rondi, they were able to get Allison pretty easily. And from there, they got DJ, Damien, and Mrs. Jules. She was the oldest one. Eventually, they figured out who everybody really was. They did have some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually, they're still not absolutely sure. Everyone just decided to keep their own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things easier. Mac and Nancy kept their new names, though, and when they were together, they still called each other Hey You or just plain You. All right, so our next story is about Stephen, and you can't really tell, obviously, but the word on the blackboard is Halloween this weekend, and there is a goblin in the middle, and that's Stephen, and there's a ghost and a pumpkin. Stephen had green hair. He had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green leotards. The leotards matched his hair. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jules's Halloween party. Mrs. Jules's Halloween party for the class. Unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. Ha ha, you sure look strange, said Jason. Jason was Stephen's best friend. So do you, said Stephen. Boy, are you dumb, said Jenny. Halloween is on Sunday. Today is only Friday. You're the one who's dumb, said Stephen. You'd probably come to school on Sunday. Mrs. Jules said we'd have the party today. But none of the other children wore costumes. Only Stephen. All right, class, said Mrs. Jules. It's time for our Halloween party. See, said Stephen. Mrs. Jules gave each child a cookie that looked like an orange witch with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stephen, and she forgot to give him one. Stephen didn't ask. He was afraid that she'd laugh again. The children finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. All right, class, said Mrs. Jules. The party's over. We have a lot of work to do. Stephen felt like a fool. The party lasted less than a minute, and he had to spend the rest of the day wearing his goblin suit. Look, Stephen's wearing his sister's leotards, laughed Dana. They're green, just like his hair, said Eric Bacon. Everybody laughed. Mrs. Jules began the arithmetic lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 5. That's wrong, Joy shouted. Mrs. Jules tried again. 2 plus 2 equals 3. That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 again and got 43. It was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get 2 plus 2 to equal 4. I don't understand it, she said. They've always equaled 4 before. Suddenly, she screamed. The chalk turned into a squiggling worm. She dropped it on her foot. Then all the lights went out, and the blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long, pointed tongue and pointed ears. She stepped off the screen and into the classroom. It was the ghost of Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the blackboard. Trick or treat, you rotten kids, she said. Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where's Todd? Who is that? asked Mrs. Jules. Mrs. Gorf, said Damien. Who's Mrs. Gorf? asked Mrs. Jules. She was the meanest teacher we ever had, said Rondie. What happened to her? Asked Mrs. Jules. She got turned into an apple and Louis ate her, said Jason. Well, I'm not going to allow this, said Mrs. Jules. Get out of my classroom, she demanded. It's Halloween, sweet teacher, said Mrs. Gorf. Ghosts can go anywhere they want. I've come for a little class reunion. But it isn't Halloween, said Mrs. Jules. Halloween is still 2 days away. I know, said Mrs. Gorf, but Halloween falls on a Sunday this year, so we're celebrating it on the Friday before. Stephen leaped up from his seat. See, I was right, he said. Today is the day we celebrated, the Friday before. Mrs. Gorf proved it. He ran up to Mrs. Gorf. They all laughed at me and made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up. But they were the ones who were wrong. You and I are right. He put his arm around Mrs. Gorf and hugged her. Mrs. Gorf gasped and disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jules picked up the piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 + 2 = 4. That's good, she said. When 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen. All the children who had laughed at Stephen now called him a hero, but they told him to go home and change out of his costume. So at lunch, Stephen went home, washed up and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt. Of course, his hair was still green. It always was. And the final story in the book is about Louis, the yard teacher. Can I get Louis in focus here? Yeah, it's not going to cooperate. Let's try again. Louis. All right, there's Louis, the yard teacher. All right. Louis had a red face and a mustache of many colors. He was the yard teacher at Wayside School. It was his job to see that the children didn't have too much fun during lunch and recess. And if you haven't already guessed, he's the one who wrote this book. On June 10th, there was a blizzard. Louis was afraid that the children would have too much fun, so nobody was allowed outside. Class, said Mrs. Jules, after you finish your lunch today, come back up to the classroom. You are not allowed outside. The children all went to the lunchroom. Miss Mush had made tuna surprise. They looked at it, then hurried back up the stairs. There was nothing to do. Now, class, said Mrs. Jules, I know that you're all bored, but I have a special surprise for you. I hope it's better than the tuna surprise, said Marisha. Mrs. Jules continued. Louis is going to come up and entertain us. He will tell us a story. Now I want you all to be on your best behavior. When Louis walked in, all the children booed. Are you going to tell us a story? Asked Bibi. Yes, said Louis. Well, it better be good, Bibi warned. It better be better than the tuna surprise, said Eric Fry. I thought the tuna surprise was good, said Louis. You'd eat dirt if they put enough ketchup on it, said Mac. Hey, everybody, be quiet, said Todd. Let him tell the story. Not too loud, Louis, said Sherry. I'm trying to get some sleep. Louis sat in the middle of the room, and all the children gathered around. He began his story. This is a story about a school very much like this one. But before we get started, there's something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. In this school, every classroom is on the same story. Which one? The 18th? Asked Jenny. Nope, said Louis. They're all on the ground. The school is only 1 story high. Not much of a school, laughed Damien. Louis continued. Now, you may think the children there are strange and silly. That's probably true. However, when I told them stories about you, they thought you were strange and silly too. Us? The children answered. How are we strange? I'm normal, said Stephen. Aren't I? As normal as I am, Joe assured him. The children at that school must be crazy, said Leslie. Real Lulus, Mauricia agreed. Tell us about them, Bebe demanded. For one thing, said Louis, none of these children has ever been turned into an apple. That's silly, said Dee Dee. Everybody's been turned into an apple. It's part of growing up. Louis continued. Dead rats don't walk into classrooms wearing raincoats. What do they wear? Tuxedos? Asked Todd. And the girls never try to sell their toes, Louis added. Well, no wonder, said Leslie, at today's prices. Louis continued. They don't trade names or read upside down. They can't turn mosquito bites into numbers. They don't count the hairs on their head. The walls don't laugh. And 2 + 2 always equals 4. How horrible, said Damien. That's not the worst of it, said Louis. They have never tasted Mauricia-flavored ice cream. A hush fell over the classroom. Mrs. Jules, I'm scared, said Allison. Is there really a school like that? Of course not, said Mrs. Jules. Louis was just telling a story. It was a good story, said Leslie. I thought it was silly, said Kathy. I liked it, said Rondi. It was funny. Mrs. Jules said, Louis, it was very entertaining. But we don't really go in for fairy tales here. I'm trying to teach my class the truth. That's all right, said Louis. I have to go down to room 29 now and tell them a story. He started out the door. Class, said Mrs. Jules, let's all thank Louis for his wonderful story. And everybody booed. Okay, now if you enjoyed this story, there are 3 more Wayside School stories. The first one is Wayside School is Falling Down. The second one is Wayside School Gets a Little Bit Stranger. And the third one just came out right before I started reading these stories to you in the classroom, and it is called Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom. I want to thank you all. I had a wonderful, wonderful time reading to you this year. I wanted to say this semester, but really it was for the full year. I'm sorry that we didn't get an opportunity to say goodbye in person. I'm sorry I didn't get to spend more time in your classroom, but I really enjoyed reading to you this year. You all have a wonderful, wonderful summer and a great time when you go back to school in the fall. Whether I see you in the school or not, I don't know. They haven't decided yet whether they're going to allow visitors into the school. But either way, I will be reading to the 3rd grade class again. So if you have any friends who are in 3rd grade, I hope I get a chance to meet with them. Now, you all have a great summer and best wishes for grade 4 and whatever you do in the future. I'll miss you. I hope you had a good year. Bye-bye.